My name is Mc Cluskey. I'm with the University of Nebraska College of Law. One of the co-presenters in this presentation on Helpdesk technology. The other one is Mc Slayden from Cornell, who's sitting right down here in front. So we're just going to run for between 15 and 20 minutes, and then we'll have kind of an open forum. Neither of us are really sure what direction to take with this. We're trying to cover all grounds. Small help desks from single person to 3 to 4 users, something like that, all the way up to a larger help desk with more organized, structured like things of that nature. So you can bear with us, we'll kind of get things going here. As I said, my name is Mc Cluskey. I'm at the University of Nebraska College of Law. I've been there for about a year now.
Can you speak up a little bit, please?
I will definitely try. We're limited on the mic here. We're trying to work around a laptop, so it's going to be interesting for us. I am Mc Cluskey. I'm from UNL Law. I've been there for about a year now, and I am the help desk. Prior to this, they had a variety of hard to near full-time individuals. I kind of stepped in as a help desk person, and it's turned into far more than that. So it's turned out to be an interesting experience for me. Briefly, I guess the co-title for my presentation is How Not to Lose Your Mind Overnight if you happen to have this unexpected, unplanned, and suddenly essential job put in your lap. I was kind of aiming mine towards individual people, particularly in library settings, that may have suddenly found themselves responsible for the systems because they knew the software for no other reason. So I do have to make a confessional off the start here. First of all, I am not a lawyer. My background with law is limited. I've consulted for them. I've set up offices for them, but I am not a lawyer by trade, so I'm handicapped by some people's definitions, so you know. Second thing is I am from a network engineering background. Prior to joining the University of Nebraska, I was a quality engineer running a network for Gateway 2000. So as a result, I have some convoluted logic that a lot of people have a hard time following. If you are having a hard time, please throw your hand up, tap dance, yell, scream, throw things. Get my attention, I'll try to explain it. And last but not least, this is the most important thing that anybody in IT needs to learn. The world does not end if your pager, your cell phone, or an email is missed. This is very important, and particularly in this kind of environment, the ramifications of the law school, while yes, they are very nasty, having a professor who is an adjunct and has been in the business for years and years may be unpleasant. It is nothing like the stress of knowing that if you don't do your job, it's $10,000 a minute that the company's losing out. Quite literally, approximately a quarter of Gateway's production would go down if one of my servers did. So if you want stress, that's a stressful environment. IT support. Specifically, what is it? Realistically, IT support breaks down into a couple of areas. Obviously, is hardware. This breaks up into network hardware and the workstation. When I say network, I'm being very, very broad here. I'm not trying to classify anything because depending upon the setup that you might be experiencing, you can manage everything from a server all the way through the router sub switches, everything to the lines that run into your building. And in some cases, even beyond that. So that potentially could be part of the issue. The other part is the workstation hardware. For help desks, this is usually the bigger issue because you're dealing with the end user one-on-one. Ideally one-on-one. In some cases, it may be more than one-to-one, and that's usually when you want to call for support. But the workstation hardware, when I say that, we're talking about the end client, the system, monitor, any peripherals attached to it. Then you have software support. Software is generally, obviously, software is what runs on the system. And finally, you have your user relationship. In a help desk environment, no matter what anyone has said, from working at Gateway, being a consultant, ultimately, it does boil down to being a user relationship. You've got customers with software, they've got hardware, and they have a problem, and that's what you're there for. And if you can't work with them to solve the problem, then you have problems. Issues at large that you may be faced in a small environment. Having stepped into a situation like this, I'm increasingly learning there are financial limitations, especially for me coming from a Fortune 500 business environment to a university where there is a rolling kind of fiscal environment versus pick a budget, set it out a year in advance, and get it pared down, and then find a way to work within that budget for a year. Next thing is administrative support. Depending on your department, your location, you may have anywhere from complete support to no support at all. And that is a very big issue for any help desk. Institutional limitations. It's the next step up on the ladder. Most law colleges are part of, obviously, a larger university, and I have yet to meet anybody who doesn't somehow interact with that university. And will be it the networking lines to day-to-day issues inside of the building, maintenance control, even software and hardware in the system. Another major issue that faces a help desk is training. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Technology is an investment, and you have to invest in the personnel to support it. As a result, I don't have any quick fixes for any of these things. I'm still trying to learn the quick fixes after being in it for a year. I'm not finding any, but it's something that in a help desk environment you have to be an advocate for your help desk to try to help them because ultimately it benefits the end user in the college. How do you manage an IT department, a help desk with limited resources? Biggest question, and I'm still learning, but I'm falling back on some experience at Gateway with ISO 9000, which is an industry standard for defining processes. Basically, it sets a process for how you do everything from eat to breakfast to go home at night. Inventory is a major part of it. To really be able to manage a help desk environment, you have to know what you have in your system. Be it individual systems, the stuff in the closet that people have forgot about, the servers that are in another building across town or across campus or potentially in another town. You really have to know what you have because it's going to help define your strategies down the road. If you have a critical failure, if you have a major problem, what do you have to fall back on? Record keeping. Record keeping is essential. The degree of which I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you that this is mentioned formula that works. I've been searching for that for better than 10 years and I haven't found it yet, in all honesty. And it varies place to place. Some places you may actually have a structure where you need to track every individual record. User relationships. This is something that help desks, in my experience, do not provide a lot of help on, particularly once you get out of an end user environment like you would find in a university or a business and you start dealing with a customer. I've been an advocate for a long time that technical support at the vendor level, major companies, Dell, Gateway, IBM, really have to do a lot to improve the technical support because ultimately they interface with the consumer and that affects the end. Other issues at large, generally this is a nice way of saying politics. You can't go anywhere without facing politics, and at the university level it's actually, in my experience, seems to be less than what I dealt with in the corporate world, but it is something that affects everybody. And how you deal with it affects how your help desk runs and the kind of support you're going to get. Inventory. There's not a whole lot to do other than say inventory. You need to know what your hardware is. At the very least, you need to know serial numbers, the manufacturers, and locations. For a small help desk, this is really important because if somebody calls you up and says, I have a problem with this system and it's doing this, and you can obviously identify it's a hardware failure. If their CD-ROM doesn't work, it doesn't read anything, you know you need to replace it, the system's old. What you need to be able to do is look at something and say, okay, this is what it is. You can call tech support, give them the information that they need, and they do have to have this information to be able to form a record for the system. Look at a serial number, you get the replacement part, you save a whole bunch of time, and you don't have to run halfway across the building to do this. It's a time saver. Locations are also helpful. If you know that somebody needs to move and you're relying on part-time help or student help, you can make out a real easy work ticket where you say, okay, this system is in this room, it needs to be moved to this room, and it needs to be set up. Software. Increasingly, my greatest fear is Microsoft's actually going to get serious about software licenses and start checking them. And that's, I say that tongue-in-cheek, but in reality I think everybody probably has seen it where you have uncontrolled software. Somebody gets something and all of a sudden it's on 10 systems in the college. Nobody knows who it belongs to for sure. It's all got the same serial number. On a more direct basis, it's a good thing to know what you have out there. A case in point, the situation I stepped into, we were running everything from old versions of DOS, WordPerfect, and Office all the way up to the latest and greatest. And I still don't know for sure how many copies of what we have. I've been working on this for a year, and I have a general idea of what's installed. I know what the installed user base is, but I couldn't tell you how much has been purchased. And another reason that these inventory and records actually comes into play is most places you have purchasing department. If you really have to know, you can go back and have whoever does your accounting dig through the records and find it. That could take hours, days, weeks, months, years, depending upon your record system and the person doing it. And it's easier to go through, spend the time, and actually find out what you have. Just right up front, then you know you starting from square one. Networks. I include network as a separate inventory, increasingly because the network is a part of day-to-day operations. The day of having a standalone PC that sits in the office and is used for word processing has passed us by. I still have professors who think that. I'm still trying to convince them of this, but I'm pretty sure everybody here can relate to this. In our case, I do not directly manage our internet access or our lines. I'm fortunate enough to have an IS group that is very, very productive and very helpful. But for me, it's awfully easy to go to a database where I have a list of all the ports in all the rooms and be able to look at everything that's there. And I can pin down and send in a report without actually having to go to the room, which could be in another building or downside. It makes for a real quick turnaround. And it also is easier, so if, say, you have a CLE come to town, and they need a connection, and they're asking about this room that generally isn't ever used for anything but small group meetings for students. Do you have a live port? Do you not have a live port? If you have 24 hours to make it live, then you can make a quick call rather than spending an hour going there and getting interrupted en route. Record keeping. Record keeping is an important part of this whole process. You need to have a system. And this can extend in a lot of directions. You can have logs where you track everything. I've met a lot of people who feel that the best way to run a help desk is to track every little thing, nickel and dime it out. Help desk requests, parts orders, where you know every system's history going back to the days of when it was brand new right out of the box. I don't necessarily believe that you need to go that in-depth. In our environment at the University of Nebraska, it's actually counterproductive. We don't nickel and dime things out to the point where we spend X number of minutes and we have a charge. And most people don't want to view things in that way. It also tends to generate a lot of negative backlash. I know in the professional world where the thing of back charges was a very nasty issue because somebody would go and do something and not mention that they were being billed for it, then they get a bill and they want to complain, and so they do something despite because of it. It's just a generally unhealthy practice. But in some institutions, I recognize that this is how things are done, and it's sometimes a necessary evil, I guess is the best way to describe it. Biggest thing for a help desk, if there's a key to this whole thing, it has to be document the process. There have been a couple of other presentations here at CALI already that have talked about how do you define an IT group, how do you define the responsibilities, how do you get quality service. You need to document the process, and this can go from having a one-on-one sitting down and being a verbal agreement to actually forming out some kind of a general agreement or an expectation of services rendered. It also extends beyond that. The situation I stepped into, there hadn't been a full-time person managing the network for quite a while. Nobody really had a firm grasp of how anything in the network was set up, be it user rights, logins, passwords, the hardware. I had to jump through a lot of hoops to find out who had the passwords to the servers initially, because nobody really knew. It hadn't been a question for quite some time. If you document all the little day-to-day tasks the first time you do it, then you actually have a record. And should you be gone, you run into an accident, or you move on to another institution, or retire, whatever the case may be, the next person stepping in has a book that they can pick up and say, oh, okay, this is how they did this. They can at least follow the logic. They may or may not agree with it, but it gives them something to work with other than a piece of hardware and a situation that they're not entirely sure how things are tied together. Strange quirks. How they occur, how did you resolve them? Realistically, this is a very major part of any help desk. I have yet to be in a place where there isn't somebody who knows all the tricks to fix a system. And usually these are things that they've been doing for a number of years. And it's just a problem came up, somebody found a solution because nobody else was there to answer the question. They've been doing it, but this isn't documented anywhere. So It's actually important to try to get these things down on paper so you can pass them around to everybody. So in the process of troubleshooting, they have a quirk. They look at a sheet of paper and, oh, try this, it tries it, it works, and that's a call that's been averted, and potentially time and money saved. Finally, this kind of leans more in the direction of management of the help desk and rights, responsibilities, and the maintenance questions. Who is responsible for what? There needs to be a direct flow of command, of organization, of how you contact the help desk. In a lot of places, I've seen that there are some very organized systems. Keith at Cornell has one that's absolutely amazing. But I've also seen for every one of those three that has no system whatsoever. They run up and tell somebody, they call and they leave a message. A lot of this even extends further into the users. How do they call the help desk? When I was at Gateway as a engineer, one of the things I absolutely loathed when somebody would call, leave a message saying that their system is not working. They don't tell me anything about it. They don't give me a location. They don't give me an extension. Oh, yes, I can get the extension from Odex. This means absolutely nothing to me. I can't put a priority on it. I can't say, okay, we have a major problem. I can't send a technician down. It's something that actually is to your advantage to actually have wrote down someplace what the flow is. And in a lot of cases, particularly in small help desks, the process flow is going to involve a couple of people. There are probably people who are directly responsible for some particular aspect, be it a lab or a certain segment or a part of a department, and they ask that person first, and then if they can't solve it, they go to the next level. These are things that you may not need to necessarily have wrote out into some kind of a contract thing, but you need to at least understand what the flow of information is. And for the help desk, this is really important, particularly if your help desk isn't bound to a law college, because I have discovered law colleges are definitely full of their own unique ways of doing things. And I'm sure everybody here who has been in this situation can relate to it. But it works out to being to your advantage if you can determine what the flow is, and it also saves stepping on toes. The voice on the phone, ultimately, this is what the help desk is about, is the person on the other end that has the problem. Defining the request and the flow of information. I worded this very poorly on my PowerPoint presentation, but ultimately this is what it's about. You have to be able to define it, and this extends also into getting the end user to be able to describe the problem. Saying that there is a problem is great, but it doesn't put any priorities. It doesn't help them understand what their problem is. If it reoccurs, how they can fix it themselves. You need to define the information, system information, location, specific problem, software, hardware, whatever it is. The 5 W's, who, what, when, where, why, how. How, I guess it's not a W, but essentially you need to be able to do it. And with computers, there are so many quirky things that happen with one particular way of doing something. WordPerfect, Microsoft, take your pick, any Office application has gone through these things where there's one particular way of doing something, and for some reason, lawyers seem to be the ones to find these. An undocumented problem with WordPerfect that causes an entire document's formatting to be corrupted by using a font that's just slightly too large. It doesn't say anything in the manual, it's not possible, but I've seen somebody ruin 2 chapters of a 40-plus chapter book doing this. Define general limitations. Coming from a help desk environment, both at Gateway and into the law college, you have to define what is a problem that needs to be troubleshot. What is something where you're coming into a case of tutoring, or even worse, doing contract labor. There are professors out there that are going to take, they're going to take advantage of it. They have a question, and that question turns into, well, can you fix this whole thing so it works like this? This entire document needs to be reformatted in a way, and the next thing you know, you've become a secretary. So, and I say that with the utmost highest of respect for secretaries. My mother is a legal secretary, and I have learned more from her than I ever would have admitted growing up. But this is a very big issue, and one of the things that ultimately drives a help desk for a case like Gateway, Dell, IBM, the people sitting on the other end of the phone are there to fix a problem to get the system usable. There is a very defined line. Once they've fixed the problem, then it becomes a user issue. They need to learn how to use the tool. It falls back onto the case of the computer as a tool. It's like anything else. And yes, this is not an ironclad thing. You are going to have more exceptions to this rule than anything. But it is good to try to work towards having at least a general understanding that this is something beyond what you normally do. Otherwise, you're going to spend lots of time chasing problems that really aren't problems. Information resources. The biggest thing that I've encountered with a small help desk is finding answers to questions that are not sitting in plain sight or within the context of the building that I have. At the university, I've been fortunate. We have a really good library system. The law library is tied closely with the rest of the university library systems. If I have a question about something that relates to their software, I can ask, be it a chat, email, phone call, and usually I'll find the answer real quickly. If you're tied to any institution, it's worthwhile to find out what resources that the people have, because that is a very inexpensive and quick way of getting the answers. Next one are educational resources. A lot of universities have subscription to technical journals. Microsoft TechNet is a case in point. It's a pain to do a query in. It's monstrous, it's huge, but there's a lot of weird little kernels of wisdom that can fix problems if you know how to look into them. Online references for everything that you find usually in a library or educational institution, it's somewhere online. A lot of them anymore are starting to move towards a pay-for-search structure. This isn't necessarily good, but sometimes it's the only place you can get an answer. Vendor support, there's a reason it's listed down the list as far as I'm concerned. The last thing I really want to do is have to call a vendor. I'd rather solve the problem in-house. Ultimately, in a lot of cases, a lot of the major vendors that you purchase from, after 90 days, you start running into charges. And that isn't always true. But for me, it's just easier to find the problem, find the solution if I can. And finally, you've got local help. A lot of times, this is going to be anything from a student who has an interest in computers and volunteers to bringing in a consultant. I wish I could tell you there's some magic guidelines that make this a painless process, but I haven't found them. And having been a consultant, I've been able to see everything from people who shouldn't be in the business to people who should be paid 10 times as much as they're actually getting. The best thing I can advise you with local help, and ultimately everybody eventually will fall back on this at some point in their time. Ask around, find out who's knowledgeable. Universities are really good about being able to point out somebody. You may have to pay for them, but if you can find somebody who is fairly knowledgeable that comes with decent references, you can usually avoid most of the pitfalls and the heartbreaks that come with not doing it. Ultimately, I guess my experiences from running the help desk by myself boil down to a few thoughts. Just wanted to kind of close out by sharing them. One-on-one relationships are critical. I discovered that the most powerful allies are the people that are hardest to get along with. And that's, fortunately, some of my coworkers are sitting in this room, so they can nod their head and know my frustrations. But there's a lot of truth to this. And being as the help desk job is about fixing other people's problems, you have to become good at it. I'm not going to say how or why, but you'll be much better off if you take the time to try to get to know them and work with them. Support and involvement. The administration is essential. There is no way to run a help desk without having support from the people above you. You have to, ultimately, it comes down to defining policies and rules, picking what direction you want to go. And if you don't have their support, then it's like trying to stick something to a running elephant. It's next to impossible. Record keeping. It's labor intensive to set up. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, but it saves time and it provides justification in the long run. And the justification part is the hardest thing, getting people convinced that running around and getting inventory. So you know what you have, and being able to show the end product is the hardest part of being able to do it in all cases. No matter how hard we try, we will never, ever make everyone happy all the time. It's impossible. My goal is to shoot for 95%. I don't know if I'm making it or not, and I've been afraid to ask. Technology is a recurring capital expense. It's not a one-time expenditure. In the university system, this is slowly but surely becoming a fact of reality. But we are the advocates for their information system, so we have to vocalize this whenever we get the chance. And finally, technology is also an investment. There's no way that I would take a Jaguar to a lawnmower mechanic, but in a lot of cases, that is what people expect the help desk to do. They're not given training, they're not given experience, particularly if it's an environment like a small library where they say, okay, you get to do it because you've handled the purchases, you've handled the software before. It's pretty much akin to that. Training is an essential. It doesn't have to be expensive. A lot of times it's going to be. I wish I could say otherwise, but even if that training is having them follow somebody else in another department around to get a hands-on experience, that's better than nothing. Only with that, I'll turn you over to Keith, and he will carry on.
My name is Keith Slayden, and I work at the Cornell Law School. I'm a supervisor of our help desk operation. Our staff is a little bit larger, but we have 8 people in our entire organization, but only about half of those people are directly involved in the day-to-day help desk operation, answering questions and such. And when you're thinking about setting up a help desk, one of the first things you have to think about is the scope and the scale of your operation. What kind of an organizational structure do you have? Is it an independent organization? Are you folded into the library? It's another possibility. What kind of constituency do you have? Do you support students fully? Do you just have side support for them? What's the size of your faculty and staff? And same with your support staff. Within your own IT organization, you need to define exactly what you support, and you need to match the constituency to the support staff, to the other way around. You need to be able to say, this is exactly what we support, we have to define it, and then we have to have a support staff that matches each one of those specific tasks that we've defined. And also, you need to be able to manage customer expectations. If you have small staff, but you've made these huge goals, there's no way you're going to match anything like that. Tools of the trade. I've divided this into 3 separate sections: software, hardware, and tools for the customers to use. You really, really, really need a database. Can't stress this strongly enough. You need to be able to keep track of all of your transactions and everything else that's going on with your system. At Cornell, we have a web-based database system. It's backed by NT and IIS. It's got hooks into email. And one of the big questions is in-house development versus vendor supplied. This is going to depend on money. It's going to depend on how much your organization is willing to support. I make the argument that even if you buy into a system that's half an FTE up front, it's worth it, because that cost will get put out over several years, even if you're using maintenance. I have a maintenance contract. I have several vendors up here, and at the end of the presentation, I have links to all the vendors and the products that I talk about here. And I also have handouts up front on paper with the vendors. Hardware tools of the trade. Talking about keeping track of the inventory, keeping track of everything that you're doing. I have an alphanumeric pager and a palm-top device, which is tied into the database system. So I can be anywhere in the building. The help desk person inputs stuff into our database, and it automatically, if it's a high priority item, we've got it set up so that my pager actually gets an email message with the text of the problem. And also my palm-top device, every time I synchronize my palm-top, I get a download of a specific query from the database, which has all of my transactions that are open and specific fields that I've picked from the database. And another thing that's helped a lot with our organization and the size is remote desktop management. Instead of having to run around to the 75 staff and 50 faculty, I can actually sit at my desk, call them up, ask permission to take over their PC, and show them, controlling their mouse and their keyboard, how to solve a particular problem. From a customer's point of view, documentation is huge. It takes a lot of time to set this stuff up ahead of time, but it's really worth it because it's one of these things, publish it once, put it out there, and you can always refer your customers to the documentation. We've given each different area of our school copies of manuals for our email program, copies of manuals for our desktop productivity software. We've also got in-house stuff, which is actually published. Some of it's published online, some of it's in paper format. And the transaction database that we have, which we use internally, has the ability for the customer themselves to go into the database and look at the status of the problem. It gives them a feeling of ownership of the problem, and it really empowers the user. And this database also will allow us to publish the information online. And also, we do lots of training sessions. Cornell University has CBT, computer-based training, which is available through the World Wide Web. And we do customized one-on-one training for those users who need it. Keeping it simple is very, very important. You really need to standardize. It doesn't make sense if you've got a larger organization, or even a small one for that matter, to have 12 different kinds of PCs with all sorts of different desktop software applications. It's so much easier to centralize everything. You can centralize all of your software resources, all of your hardware resources. Then you've only got a single vendor you have to deal with. Each of those things. And if you have, excuse me, you can also, using some of these products down here at the bottom, deliver the same set of standardized software to multiple desktops. This way, again, like the remote desktop management, you don't have to go out there and visit each workstation to install a new software product. We can actually, if we want, do it once on a server, set everything up the way we want it to look, and then basically take a snapshot of this and deliver it. This is the process that we use with the database. When a customer sends a message through phone or email, it goes to our help desk. We have a full-time person sitting at the help desk who inputs that information through a web interface into the database. Once it's in the database automatically sends an email message back to the customer with all of the information that's just been put into the database. And the information is also sent via email to the technician. The technician can then go into the web, take a look at the ticket, solve it in the database, which will then send a message back to the customer, or they can go and visit the customer, solve the problem, go back to the database. But throughout the whole process, email goes back and forth between the customer, the database, and the technicians with all of the updates and everything that's going on. And one of the things we're going to be implementing soon is allowing the customer to input directly via the web into our database. And this will actually eliminate a lot of these intermediate steps, because the customer will actually be able to log into the web, log into the database, input their own problem, then go back in and look at the problem to see the status and the updates. Now I have I was actually going to run a demo of our For those of you who are Star Wars fans, you know it's Obi-Wan, Cornell. This is called Footprints. It's from Unipress. It's a very, very, very full-featured system, completely scalable from an organization our size with 8 people to an organization the size of Cornell University with 8,000 staff. I was going to walk you through the process. So we have a person who calls. And up here at the top, we click on Create Entry. We can give it a priority, which is over here. You can't really see this little pop-up. I'll give it a priority 1. You could add a status. Right now it's spoken around and get pending. Enter in somebody's username. The department's administration. All of these fields right here we customized so that we can put in whatever we want. So for instance, we created pick lists with our own applications, our own hardware items, our own topics for what they could do. This system also has an address book, so you can actually have customers already in the database, and then you'll be able to look them up at a later date.
Something you have to maintain separately, or can you tie into?
You can tie into LDAP.
Oh, okay.
And you can also use LDAP for authentication, and NT for authentication.
Now, will you be much more structured when you have people phoning in their own problems?
You can actually completely customize this screen that you're looking at right here to the point where we can specify which fields we want our customers to input information into. And also, up at the top, some of those fields were highlighted in red. The fields highlighted in red are mandatory. So I better put something in this one. It will not submit the entry unless the fields are mandatory. So we could make all the fields mandatory so that the user has to put the information in.
Keith, will either you or your users be able to search if they're having a particular software
Yes.
problem that, like,
I'll get to that in a
knowledge base?
minute. Now we can assign a ticket to anybody here. And down here, here's my pager. So I can actually assign this ticket to my pager, and I'll get a page, but I don't have it with me. So. And we also assign it, it says outside user, but that's simply because our customers are not defined as users in the database. But we always put whoever's involved with the problem, we put their email address in here so that they'll always get an update anytime the ticket gets updated. And you can also, down here it says time spent. This will allow you to track the amount of time you spent on a specific project. And you can assign a specific, if you're into cost management, you can actually assign a specific hourly rate to each of the users in your system. And then it will automatically do the costing out for the amount of time spent for each of the items. So I submit it. It should take me back to the home page. And so there's my item. Now I'll also show you what the email message looks like. I have it set up so it filters all of my Helpdesk entries. There it is. Footprints. So this is everything that dumps into the email message. And this is what the customer will see too. So they get all of this information, including down at the bottom, a history of all the transactions that have occurred. So as this ticket gets older and older and gets updated, you'll be able to see the history of the dates and times when it was updated. And this is also what gets sent to my pager.
Is the history key to the particular machine or to?
No, it's just each time that ticket is hit in the database.
How much information gets sent to your pager?
Um,
What's the next,
256 characters per page, and it just keeps sending the pages until the message is finished. Yeah.
How much is that in price?
This is the kicker, of course. It's $8,000 for the initial buy-in, $2,000 a year for maintenance. But we just had an issue last month where we did one of their upgrades, and it brought down our NT box. We had daily conversations with Footprints, technical support. They were calling us all the time. We were in constant communication. They actually rewrote the code, sent us the new code, walked us through, brought it back up again. And that's well worth the $2,000 a year that you would spend on the maintenance contract.
Does it have to be NT, Keith? I see that Perl.
This is all 100% Pro, which means it's completely hackable and customizable too. It runs on 3 or 4 different flavors of Unix, including Linux. It runs on NT.
And the database backend.
The database backend, they have a proprietary database system. They've also got SQL, which is what the one they're working on right now is working on an SQL version of this. This is actually the proprietary database, which is basically a huge text file. Right now, it's about an 8 megabyte text file. It's limited. The reporting features are really nice. Because what I've done here for my Palm Pilot, which I could not live without, I actually have it, since it's Perl, there's a command line interface for all of the stuff in this database. So I created a command line query in NT, which basically spits this information out to a text file or out to an HTML file, which I then pull onto my pilot through a hot sync. So every time I hot sync, I get this information pulled down to my Yep.
Does Footprints do anything to manage the workflow process?
It does not have project management, if that's what, like Microsoft Project.
Well, I'm just thinking it looks very dependent on the Helpdesk technician knowing that they need to assign that to your pager if they want you to be paged or what to do with the ticket next. Does the system have any intelligence or workflow built into it?
Well, since it's Perl, you could probably put that in there yourself.
But it doesn't come for the
But for
$8,000.
$10,000.
No. However, I'm on a first-name basis with the technicians at Unipress, and they've already incorporated several of my feature requests into the system, because this is Rev 3.01, and we bought in version 1.4. I mean, doing, like for instance, this query, I had asked them, you know, it would be really nice if I could do a sort on this query so that I could see how many tickets I've got assigned to each of the users in the system. And it wasn't them. They said, oh, okay, we'll put that in the next release. So they're very open to suggestions. It also has escalation features, so after a certain period of time, it'll actually bump the priority up or send an email message out to the system administrator. There's lots of things you can do with it. Now, one of the other things I talked about was putting stuff out there for the users on an intranet or an FAQ. And this is not a law school, it's the business school at Cornell, but they have a really, really good example of an intranet with documentation. When you go to their technology services homepage, this is what you get. Let's say you have a problem with Eudora. Everything's right out there in the open. You just look for your question. It's all in plain English. Then they have other documentation online. It's very straightforward, right up front, nice and organized. a model that I think, I've seen some intranets where you've had to bury, you've had to dig down 3 or 4 levels before you find what it is you're looking for. And then sometimes you have to go back up a level and back down again to find other things. I just thought this was a really good example.
Is that searchable?
It is searchable. They have, at the root level, you can search the entire intranet site. So you could type in a search that says Eudora and whatever. Because every page is in it. So just like some of the things that Aaron was saying, information is very important. Gathering information about your computers, gathering information about the tickets. We ran into that a lot before we educated and indoctrinated the users to actually provide us information and say, my computer's broken, have somebody come by and fix it. That's just not enough information. We want to know, what's the application? What were you doing when it happened? Things like
That's why I asked that question about, if you eliminate the desk, having that come to the desk, that seems to me analogous to a reference desk where you go through a reference interview. So unless you structured that query very definitely.
it would be structured like an interview, I think. And it would, if we use LDAP integration and NDS, the user's information, phone number, username, all that, could actually be captured when they go to the site. So that the only part that they have to put in then is the issues related to the specific problem. They wouldn't have to type in their username and their phone number and their room number, things like that in the database. Because that would automatically get captured.
And they don't get to set the priority.
No. What happens is it comes into the system, and it comes into the system in a separate queue. There's the one queue for the main help desk where we put the information in. There's a separate queue for requests, which are piped in either from email or from a web page. So then the administrator has to go to the requests and assign them to a user and assign a priority. When you do have the data, it does help a lot with resource justification. It also helps with reporting back to customers. And I've been in this business for 9, almost 10 years now. Having a live body at the other end is really key. Users hate talking to audits and voicemail. A lot of times they'll just hang up. They won't bother. So you really, really need to have a live body at the other end. Even if you're only one person, one thing we had tried for a while was just check the voicemail every half hour. If your users know you're doing that, they're more inclined to leave a message. And communication is really key. Talk to your users, provide that feedback loop so that as you're updating the problem, they know exactly what's going on. So that they're not left in the dark until all of a sudden somebody shows up to fix their problem. The Helpdesk Institute is a very valuable resource. However, it costs money. I don't know what their current subscription fees are. And all of this is available. I have a handout here. They have their own press, and they produce a book every year, which contains, it's a 200-page book with a list of every single vendor of Helpdesk software. It's a very, very valuable resource. The Microsoft source book I've found very helpful. It gives all sorts of best practices and ideas on just how to ramp up the help desk. And Information Systems, Policies, and Procedures is also a really good source book for defining your process and defining the scope of your operation. What will I support? And it also is a great section on documentation, on how to structure your documentation, what you should include and shouldn't. A whole bunch of URLs here. Helpdesk database systems, we use footprints. Cornell University, at the university level, uses a product called Vantage. There's also Remedy and McAfee. Remote desktop manipulation, we've been using Timbuktu. PC Anywhere is also available, and ManageWise, the new ManageWise client, has a really slick remote desktop manipulation piece in. And management, Ghost allows you to set up one PC exactly how you want it. Basically take a snapshot of that computer. You can burn a CD or take that snapshot, stick it up on a server, and then if you've got a PC that's down, just restart that PC, use the Ghost software, and it completely rebuilds the computer exactly like the image. PCRDist does something similar, except instead of creating a static image, you have a folder sitting up on a server with all the files for that computer, including registry changes. And it will check a file-by-file comparison. Replace files that are missing, delete files that aren't supposed to be there, update registry changes. ZenWorks is including with the ManageWise package, and that allows you to deliver software updates, things like that, as part of the login process when they log into network. Yeah?
Back on the remote desktops, I think we've had a lot of luck with our school is VNC, Virtual Network Computer from Oracle, what's now AMD Research Labs in England. It's cross-platform, client, server, even a Palm Top. I hear you get a viewer to see your servers or whatever. It's open source, it's free.
Yeah, I know VNC is one of the shareware free products.
I have a question. I know Ghost, I've used Ghost in the past, and it's great in terms of just, you got to roll out of 50
Right.
computers, bam, you're done.
Right.
Have you had any problems with it? Like, it just seems like it's a little quirky sometimes, and like sometimes a computer will work and other times it won't, and it's the same image. I mean, it's the same image that we're downloading from.
We've actually seen that. We had some desktop PCs where you actually had to have the network card and the video card in a specific order in the PCI bus.
Okay.
Because the BIOS it's usually related to BIOS. When you run into problems like that with Ghost, it's usually the BIOS. Try and update the BIOS to the most recent version.
Another thing that we found, brand new systems rolling out the PCI bus because they were already configured that way, is sometimes you actually have to do an unconditional format on the hard drive. For some reason, the signature will stay around and corrupt the data as it pulls it out. And I wish I could say that I could pin it down to a particular brand or model, but I've had it happen with Western Digital Sparks and CBS. It's something, it takes a little bit more time to do it that way, but after, I haven't had any failures after, so that's another possibility.
Okay.
With ZenWorks and with the ZAC, Zero Administration Client, they're more along the lines of PCRDist, and that they don't provide a base image, but they'll do the updates. ZenWorks and ZAC basically take a snapshot of a computer before you do a software update. You do the software update, you take another snapshot, and they develop a script which is executed when you do the update on a computer that hasn't been done on. There are some drawbacks with that. You have to do them incrementally, and if one of your computers has missed one of those updates, you're going to be in trouble because it may be missing a file that needs to do an update further along. But the nice thing with ZenWorks is that it's completely integrated with NetWare and ManageWise. Any questions, comments? Yeah.
Do you promise me any type of turnaround time if we go through the web and request anything, or?
We actually, the priorities that we have set up in our database system are tied to specific turnaround times internally to our department. Priority 1 is basically immediate response with a resolution in 4 hours. Whereas priority 4 is we set up an appointment with you and schedule it for a later date.
Where again is the knowledge base? Where was that? Where was that?
Let's go back. You can actually do a search on this database, and you can search on any field that exists in the database. You can search on a range of dates. You can search on a user. You can search on a phone number, anything.
What about a topic?
start with.
I'm thinking in terms of maybe the users, end users can do some troubleshooting on their own before we get there.
Well, what we do, basically, the entire ticket gets dumped into a single text field. So we could publish that one text field as the field for them to search on. And then they'd be able to, because all of the fields are indexed to search on. So they'd be able to search on the main text field.
Okay, so someone could type in printing problems.
Right, and then anytime the word printing appears,
Pull
it
up
would,
on that.
yeah.
Is that a knowledge base that they build out? Or did you-
This is all part of the same system.
Yeah, I was, but I'm still very much part of the economy person. They don't, they show me directions. Are you?